On January 12, 2010, the sun rose over Haiti, casting its warm light on a land steeped in both natural beauty and hardship. As the day progressed, farmers diligently tended their crops, lively markets bustled with activity, and the streets of the capital, Port-au-Prince, filled with students and workers on their way back home. But just as life seemed to carry on as usual, everything changed. At precisely 4:53 p.m., the earth convulsed with such ferocity that it rippled like waves in a turbulent sea. 80% of schools, 50% of hospitals, and 60% of the nation's economic infrastructure were turned to ruins, while vast neighborhoods were flattened entirely. All it took was a mere 30 seconds for this earthquake to become the deadliest catastrophe this century, killing upwards of 316,000 people and injuring an additional 300,000. Ultimately, 1.5 million people, or 15% of Haiti's entire population, became homeless. A country already grappling with poverty, low life expectancy, and limited infrastructure found itself facing a disaster beyond comprehension. Indeed, Haiti's GDP per capita was already 5 times lower than the Latin American average, 6 times lower than its neighbor, the Dominican Republic, and it was officially the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere. The earthquake left an insurmountable financial burden, with basic reconstruction costs surpassing Haiti's entire yearly economic output. International aid poured in, but efforts were often ineffective, uncoordinated, and manipulated to benefit the powerful few. Today, Haiti is currently teetering on the brink of becoming a completely failed state. With no elections since 2016, an unelected president in power, and 90% of the capital controlled by ruthless gangs, the nation has descended into anarchy. The economy has all but collapsed, and by some estimates, nearly 5 million people, or 40% of the population, face the threat of starvation, while murders, kidnappings, and daily extortions have become the norm. The government has lost almost all capacity to control the nation and has started begging the international community to step in before it's too late. But it wasn't always like this. Once upon a time, Haiti was the most profitable colony the world has ever known. It boasted an economy that dwarfed the newly created United States, was more valuable than the combined New World holdings of the Spanish Empire, and generated 50% of France's entire economic output. For a period of time, Haiti was the most valuable piece of land on Earth, but it came at an unimaginable human cost. Haiti's wealth was built on the foundation of a particularly violent and brutal form of slavery. Yet this fact laid the groundwork for the largest and only successful slave revolt in history. As the second free nation in the Americas, Haiti was teeming with hope and optimism about a future determined by and for its people. How then did it transform from unimaginably rich to devastatingly poor? As we explore the challenges that have hindered Haiti's economic growth, it's important to remember that Haiti isn't alone in facing these economic struggles. In fact, many modern countries like Greece, Venezuela, and Argentina have all grappled with similar issues recently. On the personal level, it can be hard to avoid these macroeconomic shifts and keep our own wealth intact, regardless of what country we're in. That's why professional investors are diversifying their portfolios to spread risk across different asset classes and regions. Others are turning to alternative investments like real estate or commodities, which may offer great stability in times of economic turmoil. In fact, diversifying into alternatives resulted in one group of investors netting over $25 million last year. And now you can too, thanks to the sponsor of this video, Masterworks, who gives access to these same alternatives in the form of contemporary art. As an asset, contemporary art prices rose an average of 29% last year, according to Barron's. And each of the 13 paintings Masterworks has sold to date has returned a profit to their investors, including 2 sales just in the last month, even in the midst of more financial upheaval. With nearly 700,000 users, Masterworks' offerings have sold out in hours before, but our link below will give your account preloaded access. In 1492, after sailing along the northern coast of Cuba, Christopher Columbus set out once again to the east, guided by the tantalizing tales of gold, pearls, and spices shared by the native Cubans he encountered. After his ship wrecked and he waded through the crystal blue waters to shore, he discovered a breathtaking panorama of stunning natural beauty and unparalleled fertility. Yet this magnificent land soon became home to unimaginable violence as the Spanish quickly waged a war of conquest, spreading new pathogens as they went. From an estimated 800,000 native inhabitants, the population dwindled to just 32,000 a mere 22 years later, while the survivors were enslaved. However, as quickly as the Spanish conquered the newly named island of Hispaniola, they lost their interest in it, deciding to allocate their resources to the gold-rich regions of Mexico and Peru. By the mid-1600s, largely abandoned by the Spanish, French merchants and pirates quickly colonized the western third of the island, and by 1697, the Spanish handed over the portion to the French government. It didn't take long for them to realize Haiti's immense agricultural potential. Indeed, the geographical fault lines that lay beneath the island created stunning mountains that send abundant rainwater down to vast open plains. Coupled with an almost idyllic climate, Haiti proved to be a paradise for growing high-demand cash crops. However, the work of growing cash crops was extremely dangerous and required brutal round-the-clock labor, which the colonists were not interested in doing themselves. As such, during France's colonial rule, 800,000 to 1 million African slaves were brought to Haiti. By 1789, there were over 500,000 slaves, who outnumbered the colonists 10 to 1. They worked on sprawling plantations for indigo, cotton, coffee, and most importantly, sugarcane. These industries, combined with state-of-the-art processing equipment, had become truly giant in scale. Haiti was now producing 60% of the world's coffee and was the largest producer of sugar, dwarfing the outputs of Jamaica, Brazil, and Cuba combined. Since these products were expensive at the time, Haiti became the most profitable colony ever known, and its lands constituted the most valuable in the world. Yet this success was a product of the most oppressive and brutal conditions for slaves in all of the Americas. While there was a possibility of slaves obtaining their freedom by buying it themselves, the bar for doing so was set high to maximize productivity while diminishing the number of eligible individuals. However, this small number of freed slaves, as well as the children born from slave mothers and master fathers, became a class of secondary elites, obtaining education and their own slaves. But ultimately, fear, terror, and torture became the norm, while the brutal conditions resulted in 5 to 10% of all slaves dying every single year. Instead of improving conditions to the bare minimum, plantation owners found importing more slaves to be cheaper. This is why, despite over 150 years of slaves being brought to Haiti, 70% of all living slaves in 1789 were born in Africa. Yet this specific fact would alter history forever. By this point, almost all the newly imported slaves came from the war-torn Congo region, being sold off by competing factions. This meant a huge portion of them were former soldiers, who brought with them critical experience in military tactics. At the same time, the slaves from many diverse sections of Africa had created a vibrant culture, along with the development of the Creole language and Voodoo religion. This almost universally shared culture crafted networks of communication, trust, and thus coordination. Along with slaves outnumbering their masters 10 to 1, the seeds for a looming rebellion had been sown. All that was needed was a catalyst. The catalyst came in the form of the French Revolution. With the French central government significantly weakened, freed slaves started demanding equal rights to their white counterparts. Yet this quickly escalated into a full-scale slave rebellion. Despite France's desperate attempts, Haitians proved remarkably capable on the battlefield, and in combination with clever use of Haiti's harsh terrain and outbreaks of yellow fever that destroyed Napoleon's forces, they continued to fend off not only the French, but also the Spanish and British who tried to take advantage of the opportunity. After 13 years of brutal conflict against the most powerful colonial empires to ever exist, Haitians had won against all odds, in arguably one of the most impressive feats in human history, which to this day remains the only successful slave revolt ever. On January 1, 1804, the creation of the free and independent nation of Haiti was announced to the world. Yet this independence came at an overwhelming cost. Over the previous 13 years, half the population had perished, the economy's backbone, the plantations, laid in ruins, while the major ports were decimated. However, the most significant price of independence was Haiti's newfound global isolation. France, having lost its most valuable colony, refused to acknowledge Haiti's sovereignty. Great Britain and the United States followed suit, fearing the successful slave revolt would incite similar uprisings in their own slave-based economies. Haiti's initial leaders understood they were perceived as a threat and faced the possibility of a reinvasion to reinstate slavery. Nevertheless, the responsibility fell upon them to shape what post-independent Haitian society would look like. While nearly all Haitians, from high-ranking military officials to laborers, agreed that their country should be founded on the principles of freedom, two major factions emerged with differing interpretations on what exactly freedom meant. The lower classes and former slaves, who constituted 97% of the population, called for control over their own labor, land redistribution, access to education, and the right to vote in a truly democratic system. In contrast, the freed slave elites and important military leaders emphasized freedom is independence from foreign powers, regardless of the cost. They reasoned that with the world actively hostile and plotting to re-enslave Haiti, a robust central government driven by a strong export-oriented economy was needed to maintain a powerful military capable of repelling future foreign intervention. This perspective was also influenced by their desire to preserve their privileged status in society. To achieve these goals, Haitian leaders believed that reinstating the plantation system was the only viable economic option. However, this idea faced staunch opposition from the lower classes and former slaves who would be responsible for working on these plantations. While a return to slavery was never contemplated, the elites introduced a new system of forced labor, closely resembling medieval serfdom. The former slaves were turned into peasants, bound to their respective plantations and unable to travel or relocate freely without authorization. Defying these rules carried the risk of severe punishment or even execution. To protect against foreign threats, a vast portion of the state's revenue was allocated to the military and the construction of extensive fortifications, being prioritized over investment in basic infrastructure or education. Meanwhile, democracy was deemed infeasible by the elites, who believed the general population was too uneducated and that it would threaten their power. Consequently, even when minor political freedoms were eventually granted, institutions were established to marginalize most Haitians, such as maintaining French as the sole official language for 183 years after independence, even though 95% of the population only spoke Creole. This meant that for much of Haiti's history, most of the population was unable to read or understand the laws that governed them. Control over such a rigid society was maintained by a single authoritarian head of state. Haiti's first leader, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, centered the new government around military structures, declared himself emperor with absolute power, and awarded land to important military officials loyal to him. In essence, the nation had overthrown their foreign masters, only to be replaced by native ones. However, the population did not passively accept this fate. Large segments of the peasant population fled to the rural mountainous regions, where they became adept at evading the government and carving out a life on their own terms. They grew food for subsistence, cultivated small coffee plots for trade, and created a vibrant culture to regulate land ownership and build communities resistant to government intervention. This marked the emergence of a potent counter-plantation culture that proved impossible for the government to stop. Yet traditions, combined with a law in 1820, required landholdings to be divided equally between offspring when inherited. As the population of Haiti boomed, this meant plots of land became ever smaller, resulting in less output per person, as well as causing severe soil erosion as the smaller plots made crop rotation impossible. In effect, this guaranteed that each successive generation would be poorer than the last. And while the government found it increasingly difficult to tax and control the population, they found ways to stifle, contain, and exploit them. Instead of directly taxing the population, the government seized control of ports, imposing heavy taxes on imports and exports. By 1881, this constituted 98% of the state's revenue. Consequently, the government grew increasingly disconnected from the needs of the people. Corruption became the norm, and controlling taxes, and thus the state, became the sole means of acquiring wealth and power in Haitian society. This system led to persistent peasant uprisings, military coups, and widespread political instability as various factions vied for the only thing that mattered: control of the government. During Haiti's first century of independence, 70% of its leaders were overthrown, executed, or assassinated, while most of the remaining 30% either died in office or resigned to avoid a similar fate. All leaders, including even those with democratic aspirations, eventually succumbed to the immense pressure from all sides, choosing to suppress opposition, amend the constitution to secure their power, purposely reduce opportunities for the masses, and employ the military to enforce their authoritarian rule. Thus, they became the very tyrants they sought to overthrow. One striking example of the repercussions for Haitians under this system occurred during the rule of Jean-Pierre Boyer. To maintain his power, Boyer deliberately suppressed education, stating himself, quote, "To sow education is to sow revolution." However, this was far from his most consequential decision. As French warships started appearing off Haiti's coast in 1825, a representative from the French king presented Boyer with an ultimatum: pay the former plantation owners for their lost property and receive recognition from France, or face invasion. While it could be argued that Boyer was forced to agree, Haitians had proved time and time again that they could fend off against foreign threats. But without consulting the population, Boyer agreed to pay 150 million francs, which was eventually reduced to 90 million. However, to pay for this, Haiti was forced to take out predatory loans from French banks, ultimately paying a total of $30 billion in today's currency. This debt took 122 years to settle, and by 1914, nearly 80% of the government's budget went toward repayments instead of basic development. After centuries of enslavement and fighting for independence, Haitians found themselves paying for their own bodies once again. Yet France's financial domination of Haiti didn't stop there. In 1888, the founding of Haiti's National Bank was not operated by the Haitian government nor any Haitians themselves. It was operated, owned, and controlled by a French bank, ostensibly because it was easier to outsource its creation. Yet the bank exerted overwhelming influence, charging exorbitant interest rates and siphoning millions of dollars back to France. Some of this money was even used to finance the construction of the Eiffel Tower. And as the government's budget dwindled, foreign merchants, especially from Germany, were granted monopolies on Haitian trade, generating short-term revenue to finance the military and suppress revolts. But the government's reliance on a powerful military proved to be a double-edged sword. While it maintained leaders in power, it also removed those who threatened its influence and oftentimes played kingmaker. Meanwhile, its decentralized structure often meant that regional armies maintained local loyalties, acting as a counterbalance to the central government's overreach. Along with the continued counter-plantation culture, Haitian society became defined by the stalemate between a corrupt authoritarian government controlled by urban elites and an impoverished yet capably defiant rural population. During Haiti's initial century of independence, the country grappled with extreme political instability, authoritarian governments that suppressed development and opportunities, foreign actors that burdened the nation with debt and monopolized its trade, and land laws that diminished soil fertility and perpetuated intergenerational poverty. This escalating cycle of impoverishment and violence provided the ideal pretext for the emerging regional power to assert its control over the fledgling nation. On December 17, 1914, U.S. Marines disembarked from the USS Machias in Port-au-Prince's harbor. They walked into Haiti's National Bank, removed $15 million worth of gold belonging to the Haitian government, loaded it onto the warship, and sailed back to New York, essentially conducting a government-sponsored international bank heist. The US justified its actions by claiming the gold might be needed to cover Haiti's extensive debts to US banks, even though Haiti had been making all payments as required. This event was part of a broader process of US financial institutions coming to dominate Haiti's economy. Indeed, just 5 years prior, 2 US banks had established complete control over Haiti's national bank when they purchased it from the French. And over the prior 4 decades, the US had eclipsed France as Haiti's largest trading partner, now accounting for 70% of imports. As the US's power grew exponentially, its strategic and economic aims expanded well beyond its borders, specifically in the Caribbean. It had taken Cuba and Puerto Rico from Spain, bullied its way to the construction of the Panama Canal, and now businessmen had aspirations of economically dominating the island of Hispaniola. Beginning in the late 19th century, American corporations started obtaining lucrative government contracts in Haiti. Among these was the National Railroad Company, which was facing financial difficulties. U.S. investor James P. McDonald assumed control of the company with the responsibility of completing a railway line that traversed the length of Haiti, aiming to facilitate economic integration within the country. To ensure the success of the endeavor, McDonald was granted 12 miles of land on either side of the railway. He envisioned the establishment of vast banana plantations in the area, and even secured exclusive rights to banana exports. The Haitian government anticipated that this would create a thriving new industry. However, the potential success of the project came at a cost. Independent peasant farmers risked being turned into low-paid day laborers, and as homes were demolished to accommodate the expanding plantations without owners being compensated, local land prices soared, and the nation erupted into indignation at what they perceived as a return to subjugation by a foreign power. Regional leaders with political aspirations eagerly inspired revolts, and army after army marched onto the capital to remove those who allowed foreign influence. In just 7 years, 8 presidents were overthrown or assassinated. Simultaneously, the US carried out a plan to cause a financial crisis so that the Haitian government would have no other option than to surrender control of the entire financial system. Utilizing its ownership of Haiti's national bank, it stopped funding the Haitian government. Haiti now found itself in absolute political chaos, bankrupt, and with the start of World War I, under the pretext that Germans would use the island to establish a naval port, President Woodrow Wilson stated, "The time to act is now." On July 28, 1915, the USS Washington arrived in the harbor of Haiti's capital, under the guise of restoring political stability, toppling the ruling elite, and instituting democracy. 330 US Marines invaded Haiti, encountering no resistance. In reality, the US sought to stabilize the country, remove barriers to US corporate investment, and establish a valuable economic satellite state. US forces quickly took control of all financial institutions, imposed racial segregation, forced labor, and placed a puppet president in charge. The press was censored, legislative members opposing US interests were deposed, martial law was enacted, and the entire military was replaced by a new one under US control. New tax systems drained the population of resources, while markets, trade, and economic activity were centralized to just a few major cities. For the next 20 years, the US controlled Haiti, and as many as 15,000 Haitians were killed in rebellions. While the US brought temporary political stability and built infrastructure, schools, and hospitals, the occupation forever altered Haitian society for the worse. Most consequential, the occupation shattered the political stalemate that had existed for a century. The new centralized Haitian military crushed internal opposition with ruthless efficiency, and the restructuring of political and economic structures provided significantly more power to those in charge. As US forces eventually departed, they had effectively supercharged the central government without instituting checks and balances or any real democracy for the majority of the population. As such, the government, long counterbalanced by the rural population, was now firmly in control of the nation and could do with it as those in charge pleased. After the United States withdrew from Haiti in 1934, Haitian military leaders swiftly seized absolute power, transforming the nation into a police state characterized by widespread corruption and repression. The military became the sole political entity, and with its newfound authority, it cracked down harder than ever on any opposition. While the US built infrastructure and schools were not maintained and left to rot. The economic situation, especially for the vast rural population, declined rapidly. Decades of flawed agricultural practices had already taken a toll on farmlands, while more efficient tax enforcement drained the population of what little profits they made. At the same time, the government began expropriating family fields and razing entire villages for ill-advised economic projects, further damaging food production. As a result, food prices soared. In the agricultural sector, the backbone of the Haitian economy, representing 80% of GDP, fell to its lowest output levels in over a century. But the situation took a dire turn when the dictator François Duvalier, known as Papa Doc, came to power in 1957. Duvalier's rule was the most brutal and repressive in modern Haitian history. He controlled every aspect of society, from religion, family structures, businesses, and the media, through a mix of state-sanctioned violence, intimidation, propaganda, and a powerful cult of personality. He purged the military of potential opposition, created a paramilitary force called the Tonton Macoutes to protect him and carry out political violence, and drove away the non-military elite class, leading to a mass exodus of skilled and educated workers. By the 1960s, over 80% of the nation's professionals were now living overseas. Meanwhile, Duvalier cleverly manipulated Cold War geopolitics to his advantage, especially in the wake of the Cuban Revolution. By suppressing leftist organizations and vocally opposing communism, he attracted mountains of aid from the US, UN, and World Health Organization. By 1961, half of Haiti's government budget came from direct financial aid, which Duvalier used to support his security apparatus and line his pockets. At the time of his death, his personal wealth, valued at $150 million, accounted for a staggering 41.3% of Haiti's entire GDP. His son, Jean-Claude Duvalier, who took over after his father's death, continued the same brutal repressions until he was overthrown in 1986. Leaving behind drained treasuries, mounting debts, a significant loss of high-skilled workers, and ultimately the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, characterized by violence and terrible living conditions. Over 29 years, the Duvalier dynasty had eroded Haiti into a shell of a nation. In the aftermath, there was a genuine push for participatory democracy aimed at breaking the vicious cycle of suffering that had persisted for 150 years. However, history repeated itself as the military, in collaboration with business elites, orchestrated repeated coups, while successive leaders became embroiled in corruption scandals. International governments continued to pour in vast quantities of aid into the country, but now, wary after 3 decades of Duvalier corruption, they bypassed the government and funneled the money through non-government organizations instead. Not only were these NGO missions frequently unsuccessful and inefficient, sometimes even competing against one another, but this approach also led to a gradually weakening of the government. Consequently, and in the wake of successive natural disasters, the government has now found itself incapable of enforcing laws and controlling basic state institutions. In the resulting power vacuum, gangs have now taken control over much of the country. Violent crime and corruption are now a part of everyday life. Elections were disbanded following the assassination of the president in 2021, and 40% of the population now face starvation. Haiti's enduring poverty and hardship cannot be ascribed to a single factor such as geography, foreign exploitation, or its authoritarian rulers. It is, in fact, the devastating synergy of these elements that have shaped the nation's fate. The people of Haiti have not only been trailblazers in history, but have also suffered its harshest consequences. Yet the narrative of Haiti is a powerful testament to the indomitable spirit of its people and their unwavering pursuit of self-determination. They have stood up against the might of the world's most formidable colonial powers and defied the oppression of their own despotic leaders. It is the fervent hope of all who bear witness to their struggles that one day, in the not-too-distant future, the people of Haiti will obtain the freedom they have sought for over 2 centuries.